the feet. How do we take care of our feet, wake up our feet, warm up our feet and ankles? And how do we work on that pesky transition from upward facing dog, rolling over our poor little toesies, to downward facing dog? In this video, we're going to look at all things feet. We're going to do a little anatomy overview of what's going on through the foot and the ankle. And then we're going to look at some of my favorite tips for warming up the feet and just bringing more awareness and life into them for the practice. We'll look at how you can do that yourself, how you might use some props or some tools to help you do that, and then how finally you can do that in the practice. And then finally, we'll look at that transition between up dog and down dog where you roll over your little toes and some strategies you can do to maybe make that transition a little bit more graceful and comfortable. So before we jump into chatting about what we do with the feet, let's look a little bit at foot anatomy first. Why not? Get a little bit more familiar, because this structure here is really, really cool. So first of all, let's take a look at our lower leg bones. We have the tibia in front. In fact, do this with me, you guys. Feel this blade-like bone here. This is the thing you bang into couches late at night. This is called your tibia. And if you trace the tibia down and come to your inner ankle, your malleolus, this is actually the bottom of your tibia. What? I don't know if you knew that, but when I first learned that, my little brain was blown. I was like, what? I'm feeling this bone? Yes, you're feeling that bone. On the outside, there is a smaller non-weight bearing bone called the fibula, which comes down and you can feel its outer edge right here. Ha ha ha. So when you hold on to these two little ankle bones or the bottom of your leg bones, you're holding on to your tibia and your fibula. And these two bones create like what do they call it? A tennis and Morton? I'm totally forgetting the phrase. But they create it's like a kind of joint that you would have where you have the edges come around and the bone in the middle here, which is your talus, which we'll talk about in a sec. And the talus moves between these two bones, mortise and tenon joint. It's like a carpentry term, or like a little socket wrench. So it makes that super stable. And this is where we get this movement in our ankle of flexion and extension, okay? But wait, folks, there's more. If we go through the bony structure of the foot, as I said, there's a bone called the talus, which is kind of wedged underneath there. And then we have our calcaneus. So if you feel your heel bone, it's like a big honking bone right there, real sturdy. That's called your calcaneus. And these two also sit on top of each other and can do movement like this. The plot thickens. So there's a few different bones in your feet, lots of different bones actually, more than any other place in your body. We got 26, in fact, in each foot. What? And so the combination of all of these bones together creates a really unique structure that is both stable, which we need, but is also capable of movement and mobility. So in the olden days, before the high-heeled shoes came about, or shoes at all, we used to walk around on uneven surfaces, and our feet were really adapted for that. Of course, now we just stick them in boxes, which is one of the reasons yoga is good, at least to kind of wake these guys up again. So, tibia, fibula, talus, calcaneus. And the talus and the calcaneus are part of a group of bones called your tarsals. So if you take your hand and kind of put it across the bridge of your foot here, there's a bunch of bones in, we might say, below the ankle joint here that are like these big boxes. They're like little boxes and they're kind of unusually sized. Like the calcaneus is real big. The talus has all these different sides. And then you have two rows of bones here going across. Basically, you can find the edge of them. If you take your hand along the outside of your foot, you're going to feel a bump right about here. Boop. You can see it real easily on my foot. Boop, right there. And that is the base of your metatarsals. So the metatarsals, after we have these kind of cube-like bones lined up in these two rows, we have these long bones of our feet called the metatarsals. After the tarsus, metatarsals. Convenient, right? And those are, what we might think of as kind of the top of the foot or the foot. And that's what we feel here. And then after that, once we get to what we think of as our toes, the bones in our toes are called the phalanges, same as our fingers, phalanges. These are little like hinge joints here. So we got the long bones of our foot, We have the tarsals, which are composed of these kind of 2 rows of bones plus the calcaneus, and the talus, which is that big chunk and bone in the middle, and then the leg bones. So you can see like lots of bones in the feet allow for lots of movement, but also allow for stability. And so when we engage the muscles of our feet, we're helping to kind of lock those bones into place and create stability. So stability in our feet comes from, as with kind of any place in our body, a combination of the bony structure of our foot as well as our muscular activation, right? So in the bones of the feet, we have, they form like these beautiful arches. And, you know, people come up with like lots of different arches. Like there's 11 arches in the feet. They're very well, maybe, but we kind of recognize 3 primary arches. And those arches are the medial arch, which is the inside of your foot, the lateral arch, which isn't usually as high, and then the transverse arch, which is across the bottom of your foot this way. And the bones, the way the bones are put together helps to create those arches. Like, you know, if you look at a stone arch in medieval England or something like that, you see how the bones kind of lock in. Well, similar in our feet, these bones connect in a way that creates this arch. But the arches are also supported by the muscular actions of your feet. So let's take a little bit of a look at what the muscles of the feet are. So to consider the muscles of the feet, we actually have to consider muscles in the lower legs, because I don't know if you've noticed, but your calves are kind of big here, but your feet are pretty skinny. Like it's mostly like, you're like, this is a lot of bone in here, right? So the muscles often that pull on the feet are located in your calves. Of course, you got other muscles in there too, but this is where they come up. So you've got all these beautiful long tendons actually that come down to your toes. And if you look at the front of your foot and point it, you can actually see the tendons. Those aren't your bones, those are your tendons. These are tendons on the top of your feet. And then similarly on the back, we have muscles that go down the back of the leg, that swoop underneath, grab onto the bottom of the foot, and help to, if this contracts, whoop, point the foot. The muscles on the front help to, whoop, pull the ankle up, plantar flexion, dorsiflexion. Basically, I'm like, you know, got my little strings and I'm pulling on them. So the muscles that pull the toes up are located more towards the front of the shin, and the muscles that point the toes are gonna be located more on the back of the shin. And the arches of the feet are formed by a variety of these muscles working together. But I do want to point out 2 in particular, which are kind of cool to know about. And these 2 muscles form what is called the anatomical stirrup of the foot. The anatomical stirrup. So imagine your little stirrup pants, you know, from the 80s, and perhaps making a comeback. They come down, slings underneath, and then grabs on pretty much at the base here of your first metatarsal. So sling down, reach underneath, grab onto the foot, and this helps to lift your inner arch up. And then the ones on, we also have another set of muscles on the outside of the foot, which helps pull the outer arch up. So on the front of the foot, if you pull your toes up, can you guys see on me how I've got this big cord? What the heck? It's like a bone, but it's not a bone. No, this is a tendon of a muscle called tibialis anterior. So with your little fingers, come here and pull your toes up. Woo! Pull the toes up. Lift your inner arch up. In fact, if you lift the inside of your foot up, you'll see this tendon pop out. And if you feel to the lateral side of your tibia here, that big strong bone, you're going to feel this muscle lift up and engaged. So you can trace that tendon down, and there it does. It scoops underneath the bottom of the foot. Yeah, part of our anatomical stirrup. The other muscles that are part of the anatomical stirrup, let's evert our foot. So this is called inversion. This is called eversion. So I'm pulling the outer arch up, and you can feel like you're creating like a little divot of a racing stripe here, right? And if you trace down, oh, notice I've got like a little sling happening now around the back of my ankle, right? These are part of what's called your peroneals, or they are called fibularis, I think now, because they're attached to the fibula. Swings around, and one end of it grabs onto this little guy right here, a little bony thing, and then one swings around, crosses the foot, and goes over to the same kind of attachment point of tibialis anterior. So tibialis anterior, and friends, pulls the inner edge of the foot up. The peroneals fibularis pulls the outer edge of the foot up. So the combination of these two actions is what starts to lift the arches of the feet and give us balance when we're standing. So these are the guys that are working, and notice just, they're located actually in our calf. Come down, swing around, slurp underneath and grab on. Now these are what we might call the extrinsic muscles, X meaning outside of the foot. These are muscles that have their muscle bellies up here, but attached down here. Well, another example of that would be the long flexors of the toes, which would be coming around from the back, grab on, and the extensors, which grab onto the front. So they have, a long version, and they also have a short version. And the shorter versions are the muscles that are just inside the foot, and those we call intrinsic, inside. So we have some muscles that come from kind of outside the foot and come down into the foot, and then we have some muscles that are just inside the foot that work on the foot, and muscles between our little toe bones that spread our toes apart and pull them together and that kind of stuff. So the foot is very complicated, has lots of really cool things going on. But for the purposes of our explorations today, what I really wanted to point out is that part of what we can control, right? We can't control necessarily having fallen arches and the way that our bony structure of our feet is, but we can control how we activate the muscles of our lower leg and our foot to help support the bony structure and create pliability and strength. Whew! So that was a brief overview of the anatomy of the foot. I just wanted to give us a taste of that, just a little bit, just so that we have a sense that one, hey, it's really cool and complicated, and two, I do have some agency over the health of my foot because I can control its activation, and that will help support its bony structure. So let's take a step back for a moment and just recognize that for many, many years, and for very good reasons, we've been putting our feet into little boxes that are flat. And that's a far cry from what our feet were intended to do, which is to move over uneven surfaces when we're walking. Now we tend to walk on flat surfaces in flat shoes. So just getting your feet out of the box in a yoga practice is super good. And really what we can do in our yoga practice, both as practitioners ourselves and as teachers, is help our students to become aware of their feet. Frankly, yoga, we're still practicing on a flat surface, right? So it's not like we're running on the sand, which would be good for your feet. But it's a good start, right? And it's better than just being in shoes or not working on your feet at all. So one of the first things that we can do for our students is bring awareness to the feet. And there's lots of ways that we can do that in practice. And we'll talk about them as we go. Like if I'm doing a foot-focused practice, say we're doing a balancing class, and I really want people to bring awareness to their feet and their ankles, well, we might start off class in a variety of ways. I could do toe stretches. Evil but good. So here's the thing, you bring the toes together usually, spread the balls of the feet into the floor. Now this is the base, this is the joint, just to bring our anatomy into this, between the long bones of the feet, the metatarsals and the phalanges. It's called the metatarsal phalangeal joint, MTP joint, if you'd like. Pull the pinky toes out so you get all those toes, and this is stretching. So when the feet curl under, they're flexing, the toes are flexing. So this is stretching those flexors of the toes. And you can sit here for a while, and the thing with the feet is that there's a lot of long tendons, there's a lot of joint capsules, there's a lot of connective tissue. You've probably heard of the plantar fascia of the bottom of the feet. There's a lot of connective tissue in the feet, kind of holding all of these things together. And so when we're stretching connective tissue, or we're giving, input into the connective tissue to invite it to lengthen, or putting it under tension, we want to hold that usually for longer than perhaps a muscular stretch, because fascia takes a while, connective tissue takes a while to respond. So, you might leave people here for 30 seconds, 60 seconds. I always like to invite people to come out if they need to by coming up, but this is just a real good basic thing to do for your feet. We often forget the other side of it, mama, where we curl the toes under the opposite way. I hate doing this one, my feet don't like it very much. Sometimes instead of putting weight on this, I'll just do something like this, where I curl the toes, because we want to also stretch the front of the feet. Oh, it's so nice. Again, because remember, we got those long tendons that come down to the toes. And so adding a little stretch to those guys is a nice idea. Another thing that you can do, which is awesome, is to roll the feet out. So if you have a dowel, like a broomstick or a golf ball, racquetball here, I think this is a racquetball, squash ball maybe, I clearly don't play sports, and go ahead and roll. Like the softer is going to be nicer, harder is obviously going to be a little bit more intense, but they can control how much weight they put through the bottom of the foot. They can roll the foot. Oh, and the reason that I like this rolling is because when we're talking about connective tissue, and there's a ton of connective tissue in the feet, rolling can be a really nice way to release the fascia, applying that kind of pressure to it. Sometimes I think better than just stretching is rolling. And also what rolling does is it wakes up the proprioceptors of the feet. So we're starting to enliven the feet and give them more sensory feedback. And the simple act of doing that, if you just do one foot and then stand, you can really feel a difference between your feet. So rolling the feet out on a dowel, rolling the feet out on some sort of little balls. You can use little balls, you can use big balls. For students who are just starting off here, I would use softer balls rather than harder balls, because harder balls can be more intense, but they can control how much weight they put into their feet too. Make sure to get back by the heel. The plantar fascia comes and attaches into here, so that's a real nice spot to get, and to roll across the base of your heel as well. And loosen all that stuff up. Super good. All the way down to the toes. It's nice to bring that ball right underneath this metatarsal phalangeal joint and kind of stretch that out a little bit. You could also roll, I should totally do this more, the top of your foot. I would definitely use something soft here, right? Or put a little weight on it, maybe roll back and forth. I never roll out the tops of my feet because it's less convenient than rolling out the bottoms of your feet. But I think if you were really making a class out of it, you could consider or find ways to do this. Or students could even manually do this on their own. Ooh, but you want to be gentle. The top of the foot is bonier. The bottom of the foot has more connective tissue and superficial muscles. So the top of the foot is like right on the tendons and the bones. So you want to be kind of sweet to yourself. There's a nice little muscle here that grabs onto your toes. You could rub that little guy out. That would be what? Extensor digitorum brevis, I do believe. The short extensors of the toes. So that could be a good one to get. But yeah, rolling. And of course, rolling the shin. Here's that tib anterior. We could roll that guy. We could roll the peroneals. You guys, so good. Again, this is like more for home care than something you might do in a general class. But oh my gosh, like there's so much good stuff in here. Really, there is. If I were doing the calves, I would use a softer ball, not something hard and mean, because our shin bone, our tibia, is very superficial to the surface. So the bones are close to the surface of the body, and you want to be nice. Also, you've got lots of vasculature running in here and nerves, so you don't want to be mean to yourself. But you could find some good spots. Another spot I like to get to is this little sling. Oh, right underneath the medial ankle. You got some good stuff in there, and behind it, there's like a couple of long tendons in there that go down to the bottom of your foot that don't get a lot of love. And those muscles tend to be pretty deep, so it's hard to kind of get to them, but you can access their tendons here. Again, sweetly, nicely, not too mean. I'm using very squishy ball. Another great warm-up that I've learned from the feet, and I learned this from a yin teacher, is spreading the toes. So what we can do at the beginning of class, or you could do this at the end of the class as a nice little cool down if you wanted, is to thread your fingers between your toes. And what this helps to do is to spread the bones of your feet apart, which they're often not used to doing, especially if you wear like shoes that have a little point in them. You try to work your fingers up to that base, and then you could do lots of things. You could have little ankle circles, but I'm abducting my toes and spreading them apart, which is a nice little way to create a little bit more space in your foot. You could roll your ankles, and then you could just do a little foot rub, right? As long as people aren't squeamish about touching their feet, you could rub the feet, rub the balls of the feet, pull the toes, give them a little bit of love. One of the big things we do in the yoga practice is just bring awareness to this part of our body. It's not even about, fixing everything or, getting everything perfectly symmetrical, but just by bringing awareness to the feet and giving them a little bit of love, move the bones around a little bit here, that awareness goes a long way to waking these guys up and keeping them happy. So that's some ideas for some home care, or if you're doing like a workshop, you might be able to take the time to do this kind of stuff if you bring in the right equipment. In yoga class itself, let's look at how we can start activating the feet in our general postures. First, when you're teaching, just start with simple awareness, right? So ways to create lift and activity through the feet is to cue to the arches. So one thing you've probably heard a lot of teachers say is lift all 10 toes up, right? So what I'm doing is pulling on these muscles and these tendons that run along the tops of my feet, and I'm lifting them up. And that does help to engage the arches of the feet, and you can feel that. But here's the thing that I also want you to be aware of, especially if you're teaching, is we don't want to leave students like this, right? Because this creates a lot of tension in the top of the feet. We also want to relax the toes down. So I think it's equally important to also find these little like you're squishing sand in your feet. That's another way to engage the arches of the feet and pull up. And so if you have students lift their toes, see if they can keep that lift and awareness through the inner and the outer edges of their feet, along the bottom, the transverse arch of the foot, as they soften their toes down and even pull their toes into the floor. That's another way to get the bottoms of the feet like little jellyfish lifting away. So I just want to caution us not to create too much tension in the top of the foot, but to also balance that with pulling the toes into the mat. And that could be a little meditation you do even in Tadasana at the beginning of the practice. One cue that I like to use a lot in my classes is to cue the opposing action of the arches. So what I'll say to students, and these are kind of balanced actions that work against and with each other, is to lift the inner arches up. So imagine you got a little thumbtack there. You can try this with me. Lift the inner arches up, and that's engaging this tibialis anterior muscle, helping to pull up through the inner arches, and then hug the outer shins in. Now, hugging the outer shins in engages that peroneal, those racing stripe muscles that run along the outside of the foot. So if I just do one of those actions, say if I just lift the outer arches up or just hug the outer shins in, or I just lift the inner arches up, you'll notice that I'm going to be either on the insides or the outsides of my feet. But if I can do them both together, lift the inner arches up as you hug the outer shins in, it starts to bring activation through the arches. And then we're balancing through either the four corners of the feet or the 3 points of the feet, depending on how you like to think of it. But it helps to get the feet alive a little bit. At the beginning of the class, sometimes I'll have students like in Uttanasana or something like that, just kind of roll across the bottom of their feet, lift their toes up, squish their toes into the floor, and start to play with waking the bottom of their foot up. Just bringing our attention to these babies does a world of good. We really can increase a lot of awareness just by paying attention, right? So that's another thing that I like to do in class, and you can do that in lots of different poses. In your standing poses particularly, it's a great place to notice what's going on in the feet, like in Virabhadrasana 2. I know everyone likes to say, root the outer edge of the foot down. That's nice, but that also will tend to stretch the outer ankle. So if you notice the position of this foot in Warrior 2, right, it's a little bit like I'm rolling onto the outside of the foot, okay? I just want you guys to notice that. So I also think it's fair to play with, press through the inside of the foot. If somebody has, I'm gonna just go on a little tangent here just to throw this into our foot ankle pot today. If someone has sprained their ankle, chances are they've sprained their outer ankle by rolling it, right? This is how we do it. Well, if someone's done that and this is injured, you don't really want to push the weight into the outer edge of the foot in Warrior 2, right? So someone who has an outer ankle injury, we need to work to stabilize that. They need to use these peroneals to pull in. So if you have someone with an ankle injury, like a sprained ankle, and the outside of their ankle is lax, tell them to push into the inner edge of their foot more, right? Tell them to engage and even pull the outer edge of their foot up. So I wanted to mention that exception just because that's something that can be kind of common because people walk around with chronically loose ankles or have a chronic sprain or something like that, and this can be something that can help them find more stability in their practice. So now let's talk about rolling over the toes. So what we're talking about is this transition here from upward facing dog, right, where I'm on the top of my feet, to downward facing dog, where I lift and roll over my toes. Right? I've had students say, oh my gosh, it feels like my toes are going to break. What do I do? So let's just back this transition up and talk about how we could stage people through it. Stage one of this transition, if you're in upward facing dog, you could lift the hips a little bit. I do this so I take myself out of my low back, okay? And then turn the toes right here, lift the feet up and back. So that's one way you can avoid rolling over your toes. But you'll notice that what you need is core strength. I need core strength to lift my hips away from the floor so that I can turn my feet over and take my hips back, right? So that's version one. Sometimes right from here, whoop, I can press and do 1 foot at a time. Now, if I'm gonna press and do 1 foot at a time, you really have to do it slow to start so that your body can get weight to taking, your body can get used to taking weight on the tops of your feet. This is actually great for our feet. Our feet, again, I told you, like, we don't get a lot of stretching through the top of the foot. So finding this moment here where you can press through the ball of the foot, it's strengthening the top of the foot, I should say. It's strengthening and it gives our foot a little bit of a stretch before we come down. So that can be something that's a really nice practice for the transition. Again, do it slowly the first time, for several times, so that you can get used to what you need to do to bring the weight onto the top of one of your feet. Because our body's not used to doing that, right? It's super weird. So that's great. And if you are gonna do that, change which side goes first. So I might say like, oh my gosh, I'm pushing my left foot down. Okay, I'm gonna turn my right foot over. There we go. And then the next time I do it, I push my right foot down and turn my left foot over. So that could be another way to make your way through that transition, okay? What we generally need to, so that we don't feel like we're breaking our toes, is lift up. So the reason we feel like our toes are getting scrunched is because they are. It's because there's too much weight down into the legs. So we need to use more upper body strength, get the hips up a little bit higher so we get the lift to roll up and over our toes, not just over our toes. Does that make sense? So when I'm making this transition here, one thing you can play with is to lift the hips up. Now watch this, I'm gonna pull the toes in towards me and lift my hips up so that I can roll over them together. So there's a combination of lifting up and also dragging the feet in. And a real nice way that you can practice this is like if you got your feet on a ball. So as a home practice, my friends, if you want to try this transition or get your feet used to this, put your feet on top of a ball, could be a big ball, could be a little ball, and then practice hiking up, right? Not only is this good for upper body strength, core, and for your handstands, but it helps your body figure out how to lift the hips up to get up and over your toes in that transition. So let's look at what that transition looks like if I do it. First, I could start by doing maybe 1 foot at a time and working on really getting the lift. Eventually, I'm gonna work on doing both of my feet at the same time. So from up dog, first you find the lift through the hips and the core. Notice I'm dragging my toes in a little bit, lifting up, and then I can flip 1 foot then the other foot. Eventually, I might do both at the same time. Watch my feet as I lift up. I'm just not rolling over my toes, I'm pulling my toes in. And I can flip over them. So if it feels yucky to roll, keep your toes connected to the floor, you can lift them off the floor. Watch again, watch my feet. As I press down through my hands, I'm gonna pull my toes towards me and lift my hips up so that I actually hop over my toes. Ready? Whoop, like a little hop. And that also helps to pull the feet in a little bit to get your stance a little shorter. If I slow that down, pulling in and up, I'm lifting up so much that I can come onto the top of my toes. One way you might prepare for that is in downward facing dog. Press through your hands, lift to your MTP joints, the balls of your feet, and then push down through your toes and come onto the tippy toes, and then come back down. And have your students work on that a few times and get used to being on their tippy toes, which will help prepare them for that big lift and roll back. So there you have it, everybody. There was a big overview of the foot and the ankle and just some strategies that we can use to warm up our feet, wake them up, keep them happy, use them in the yoga practice, and also looked at that transition between up dog and downward facing dog and how we might be able to work towards doing that with both feet at a time. Some ways you might start to approach that in your practice or your teaching. I hope you enjoyed. If you liked this, subscribe for more tips. And also, you guys, always, I love to hear from you. If you have your favorite tricks, tips, strategies for working with the feet, waking them up, making them feel more loved, please put them in the comments below. I always love to hear from you. See you on the mat.